Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to greet you again. Today we will have a conversation with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, in the previous video we discussed that a person acquires what he pays for with his attention. Whatever he prepays for, that's what he gets as a result. Among other things, this applies to negative thoughts, the thoughts like, I'm weak, I won't succeed. And you said that one shouldn't give way to despair and shouldn't buy those negative thoughts, that one should choose life, choose a good mood, choose joy. You know, it seems to me there is another key point which you spoke about in the previous video, that even if a person has an opportunity to acquire the most wonderful life here, it is necessary to understand that this world is temporary, and he shouldn't spend everything he has on this temporary world. One should at least leave 10% of one's attention on acquiring peace. And you know, when in the previous conversation you said that it would be good to perform spiritual practices 5 times a day for 30 minutes, a lot of questions immediately arose. For example, if I perform spiritual practices twice a day for 30 minutes, am I doomed or what? Or what about dynamic practice, when a part of attention is actually allocated to solving certain tasks during the day, while the other part of attention is focused on the experience through feelings? Thus, the following question arises: the practice time is what? What is the time of practice?
What is the time of practice? The time of practice, my friends, is life. It is really life.
When the fire burns in you, that's what this time is.
The fire should always be burning. As long as a person here has an understanding of where he is, and as long as a person here has awareness that he is here, this fire should not go out. This is the time of practice. Generally speaking, you know, when a person embarks on the spiritual path, that's the beginning of practice. And the end of practice is when he leaves his body and becomes equal among the equals. That's when practice ends, and that's when life begins. While throughout the time of our stay here, there has to be practice, if we speak about spiritual practice.
And what about dynamic practice? Well, let's say...
But this is actually dynamic practice. After all, every moment of your stay here, you should maintain this fire of love within you. You should not extinguish or diminish it in any way. You should increase it, right? This is exactly dynamic practice. After all, you live, you move, you are busy with many things. It doesn't matter what you are busy with, my friend. If there is no fire in you, the inner fire of love, then you don't live. Someone else lives instead of you, but not you. It's a meaningless existence here, isn't it?
It is. Also, Igor Mikhailovich, there is the following question. Let's say there are many people who do not succeed in spiritual practices, but they say that when they communicate with people somewhere, for instance, they talk, convey the truth, or actively participate in the Creative Society project, meaning they build the world which the prophets dreamt of, then they feel this ignition inside them, how the fire of love is burning in them. But as soon as they sit down to practice, consciousness immediately becomes active and prevents them from going any deeper. Therefore, they worry whether this time of communication with other people, let's say 30 minutes of communication with another person while being in love, is it equated to 30 minutes when a person is entirely deeply in spiritual practice, so to say?
Well, it depends on what communication is about and what kind of love he is in.
Okay.
This is a joke, friends. While in reality, dynamic practice is precisely spiritual practice. When they communicate with people, when they work on projects, when they, let's put it briefly and clearly, when you work not for yourselves, but for the entire humanity, precisely from a spiritual perspective, from a universal human perspective. but not for yourselves. This is already practice. That's why this ignites inside you, because additional powers are given. You see, when a person serves the spiritual world and defends its interests here, additional powers are given to him. Hence, there is inner joy and lightness, and the inner fire ignites. It feels like you would embrace the whole world and opportunities expand. Isn't that true?
It is.
This is what practice is.
It is necessary to stabilize in the state,
Yes.
and afterwards you will probably succeed.
Right, but why doesn't a person succeed? Why does he fail? When a person is in communication, in deeds,
Yes.
he is burning inside. Later on, he sits down, calms down, and starts performing spiritual practice. It doesn't matter whether it's a prayer practice or a meditative one. A whole orchestra starts playing around, so to say, and a conductor appears,
Right.
together with a prompter.
Yes, a commentator in your head
Of course.
who tells you how to sit down, how to
Yes.
inhale and exhale love,
Right,
for instance.
but why does this happen?
Yes.
Because a person sits down and starts listening exactly to the one whom he should not listen to. That's the whole phenomenon. Whereas, when a person is determined, he understands and knows that he does it for people, not for himself, but for people when he defends the positions of the spiritual world or when he fulfills the will of prophets, building what the prophets dreamed of, that very creative society. A person surely burns inside, and he definitely succeeds in everything. Why? Because he is exactly busy, and all of his attention is focused on action. While in that case, when he sits down in a spiritual, meditative, or prayer practice, his attention is focused on himself, not within himself, but on himself. And here, a thought comes, have I sat correctly? Is it comfortable or uncomfortable? A slightest thought, and that's it. A person clings to it and gets back to where? To the tentacles of this octopus. There is no other name for it, which sucks on him like a leech with all its tentacles and does not let a person go, right? So everything is simple, but a person can get rid of that too. He just has to practice.
Guys also ask the following question. When you sit down in spiritual practice and your consciousness becomes noticeably activated, there are images, thoughts, and so on, should you continue practicing at all?
Continue what? Talking with Shaitan?
This very struggle with thoughts.
Struggle. Fuss in one's head, right? What to continue? Spiritual practice? Yes, one should do it. And there's no shame if you don't succeed in it, and consciousness is very active. Let's say you should start with simple things. It doesn't matter how many years you've been practicing prayers. You could spend your entire life attending church, temples of all kinds, or be a monk for 50 years. It doesn't matter at all. If you haven't overcome Shaitan in your head, then it means you should learn how to do it, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter. You should start with simple, elementary things, autogenic training, meditation, or prayer practices aimed at concentration precisely on perception through feelings. And everything will work out, but you shouldn't listen to the demon in your head. Whereas, if it's extremely difficult, then you can use the circle practice. We described it, but the lotus practice is better.
Indeed, in order to do autogenic training, you should definitely concentrate your attention.
Surely.
You know, as you've said, it's like in the grocery store. You come to buy bread, and so that you don't leave with 2 carts of goods, but know exactly what you buy.
Absolutely right.
And autogenic training will work out only if your attention is not dispersed,
Of course.
but on the contrary, focused.
When you are focused on action. Why? Because life is like that. There is a lot of diverse information. Let's put it simply, our consciousness has harassed us to such an extent that it doesn't allow us to focus on one action. Here's a simple example, okay? How to learn not to pay attention to consciousness in practice, but to perform it through feelings. Let's say, to discover this spiritual practice by means of perception through feelings. You should focus your attention precisely on that, friends. A simple example. People say, is it possible to learn that? Try to take a full cup of coffee without a lid and walk through the whole city. Can we do that? We can. Even through a crowd of people, through all the traffic lights, and through all the stores, we would be able to do that. Why? Because there's a clear action in this case, right? There's a certain algorithm, you are focused. But at the same time, what are you doing? After all, you are walking, and you are also paying attention to cars.
Yes, peripherally.
Of course, but your attention is focused on the cup of coffee, isn't it? Is it possible?
It is.
The same is possible in this case. If you are focused, you don't pay attention to the periphery.
Also, a lot of people, when encountering such a vivid inner experience of feelings, they worry, like, I only wish not to lose this state.
And they
I
lose
wish
it.
I don't lose it.
Why? Because they pay for not losing it, you see? When a person has acquired an experience of coming into contact with the spiritual world, regardless of the circumstances, but a flame has ignited in him, he starts worrying, I only wish it doesn't die out.
It dies out.
This is a doubt. He extinguishes that flame. In other words, what does he buy? A fire extinguisher, right? And he himself puts out his own little fire instead of supporting it, rejoicing, and living. Why does it last for 2 or 3 days? Well, for some people, this surge of inner light doesn't last even a day. And that's it. Consciousness erases and removes it. Why? Because we pay for fears, we pay for doubts, for our immaturity, morality. Pardon me, there is no other way to put it. After all, this is really true. Our weak-mindedness, you cannot call it otherwise. It is precisely the strength of our consciousness, you see, which forces us to be so retarded and weak-minded. That's true. We pay for that with our lives, with our attention. Why bargain with the system and pay it for our own problems? What for? Life should be joyful, nice, and wonderful. It is understandable that we live in society, and a lot of things might happen, you know? I'll put it as follows. What is true life? It means not to lose the feeling of joy and love, despite everything that's going on around you. Why? Because you can do that only when you realize that your body is mortal, that everything around you is finite, while there is life eternal, and you long for this life eternal. When your entire attention and your entire human essence is focused on attaining life, that's when you will succeed in everything, and then nothing will hinder you. Even those conductors will stop waving their batons before your face, or maybe they won't stop doing that, but it will already be their problem, not yours. They will stop it. You see, our consciousness distracts us, or trolls us, to put it simply, only when and because we get distracted, succumb to it, and pay for all this. If we don't react to all its means and methods of distracting us, it calms down. If we don't pay this conductor who waves a baton in our head and sets our thinking rhythms, he will drop his baton, sit down, and nervously smoke. Why? Because he is left without an income, while his income is our life.
I remember you saying, who would not come to a person if he is so hospitable and
Of course.
generously puts so many dishes on the
Exactly.
table, right?
That's how it is.
Who would not please the host by staying for so long
Of course.
in his field?
If we host uninvited guests, but unfortunately, they are awaited. Why? Because we start waiting for them, don't we? We don't call them, but we wait for them. Well, let's again go back to the point that a person experienced a spiritual surge. A fire ignited in him, a fire of love and joy. And he immediately begins to develop doubts in himself, right? I wish I don't extinguish it. I wish I retain it. But who is that? Those are exactly the uninvited, but awaited guests. Why are they awaited? Because you do it yourself. It's your choice, isn't it?
There's one more question, Igor Mikhailovich. Sometimes people separate themselves from consciousness a little bit, so to say, and they see and notice that here's a thought coming, here are the thoughts, I see them. The question is the following: why does a person actually keep observing those thoughts? Why does he fail to get away from those thoughts? Is it interesting to him, or what is it?
You know, I would compare this to a person who is prone to suicide. Why? Because doctors treat him and help him, but he keeps trying to kill himself. The question is, why?
There's definitely some kind of an interest in this case.
To attract somebody's attention. Suicidal people, they fight for what? For our attention. They do not strive to commit suicide. Those who really strive to do it silently, but most of them do it for show, for attracting attention. So why? When we sit down, let's say, in that very practice, do we ourselves start creating conditions for those demons to come? Likewise, we continue to approach this process somehow in a wrong way. I would say, and draw their attention to ourselves, that I have sat down in spiritual practice. Now I'll become a bodhisattva, and I will show you all. I'm deciphering. Excuse me, friends. But many people do have such a mindset. You know, we as if challenge the demons, while in reality, we give out invitations to a dinner party, where we ourselves are the dinner. That's the entire essence of this process. If you really intend to properly perform a spiritual practice, nothing and nobody will hinder you, and nobody will distract you. All those extraneous thoughts will be there as long as we pay for them with our lives. As soon as we stop paying, everything will disappear. The simple example with the cup of coffee, which you and I have discussed, it's a wonderful example. When your goal is to accumulate God's love, and you invest your attention in that, and you really strive for it with perception through feelings, so to say, at least with 90%, you de-energize all those guests. You simply don't listen to them. They are not interesting for you, right? Then everything begins to work out. Yes, it is hard. Yes, you should learn it. I agree. You should certainly learn. For this very reason, let's say, mantras as well as various ways and methods were created, such as autogenic training, to learn to focus on something. After all, again, in our society nowadays, the human ability to focus attention on something has decreased so much.
Yes. By the way, what is this related to, Igor Mikhailovich? Because they say that studies indicate that in the year 2000, a person was able to hold his attention for 12 seconds, while already in 2015, the time period was 8 seconds. So people wonder, are we becoming stupider? Or is it actually the effect of, let's say, such technological progress, social media, the internet, clip thinking?
As a matter of fact, in fact, we are becoming stupider. As for the clip thinking, it is not due to video clips, and it's not because short videos are produced. It is social media already adjusting to us. There are actually simple algorithms in those very social media. They see perfectly well how much attention we can hold en masse. So they conclude that nowadays, a person can hold his or her attention for 8 seconds at most. Hence, they present information without changing the picture for 8 seconds maximum. Then it starts working. I mean, we perceive it all. It is all being studied and observed. As for the decline in our ability to focus attention, it is not due to a big inflow of information. It is exactly due to the acceleration of our time. In other words, we are rapidly losing our human essence as society in mass.
How does this fact affect a person's spiritual path?
Negatively. I'll put it this way, negatively. Why? Because the ability to concentrate on one thing is not just an ability. It exactly shows, let's say, a person's predisposition to perceive spiritual information, to perception through feelings. There is a direct correlation here. And the more there are people of the first type, the faster the ability to focus on something for a longer period of time declines in society as a whole. It's a problem. It's a serious problem for everyone, but it shows the state of our society as a whole and what is happening to us. Or to put it simply, people die. The number of visitors to hell increases, while the number of visitors to heaven does not. This is something to think about. Or to put it even more simply, the number of subpersonalities in new generations is much greater. Hence the decrease in our mental capacities, so to say. And the ability to concentrate is not so much intellectual abilities, but rather mental ones, meaning our freedom. Our freedom is diminishing, while this is the freedom of choice, the freedom of life. That's the answer.
There's also the following question, Igor Mikhailovich. In their lives, very many people are guided by the principle to act as you feel comfortable. I feel comfortable right now, that's how I feel, and most probably it is right to act according to my intuition.
But who feels for you?
Exactly.
A simple question, who lives for you? Who feels for you? After all, perception through feelings is not that easy to develop. You should do your best, my friends. While our emotional components are a completely different category of perception. After all, emotions are mixed up with chemistry, with reactions in the body, and again, with dictators in the head. But in no way is it, let's say, a component of our personality. Because a human has personality, this is something completely different. But when personality is immature, when it is not even given an opportunity to realize that it is personality, that it exists, that's when all this happens. The problem of modern humanity is that we do not perceive ourselves as personalities. We perceive ourselves as something whole, but at the level of not even primary but secondary consciousness. That's where the trouble is. So, it turns out that we live in an illusion, the most natural illusion, the one that our secondary consciousness forms for us.
The legion of those masks.
Absolutely right. Our entire life passes only in our consciousness. This is true absolutely for everyone, just to make it clear. Why? Whatever information consciousness gives us as personality, that's what we perceive. Thanks to consciousness, we see something or do not see something. Hence, there are a lot of phenomena. That's why we perceive one and the same thing differently. Or if conditions are changed a little bit, consciousness completes a picture. People say the brain completes a picture. It is consciousness that completes it. The brain, can receive and transmit. It is not capable of anything. It can only give rise to pictures, That is its function, and that's all. It's a connecting link, nothing more.
And here's the following question, Igor Mikhailovich. A great many people, besides identifying themselves completely with secondary consciousness, stop in their spiritual development at the stage of an observer from primary consciousness. And they do not fully understand the essential difference between the observer from primary consciousness and the observer from the spiritual nature, where a human is as personality.
The difference is huge. When we observe secondary consciousness from the position of primary consciousness, yes, we have a broad perception. We see everything that is going on, right? If we have already trained, if we do that at a decent level, we see where thoughts come from and how it all happens. That is, we see all that. However, all this is external. Whereas when we are an observer, from the spiritual position as personality, then we are more focused on perception through feelings. This is different. In other words, we do not observe where and what kind of a rabbit is running to where, what path someone is crossing, or something else, you see?
Or what thought is approaching.
Of course, that's what I mean.
Yes.
It was an allegory. Excuse me. In actual fact, we perceive through feelings when we understand everything. We perceive, but then we have an understanding of why this particular rabbit runs across that path, meaning what thought has emerged and where it will lead us, you see? In other words, we can see both the beginning of inaction and the logic of where it is supposed to lead. Both the cause and the consequence, which may be formed. And at this point, already, from the position of a spiritual observer, from the position of personality, we can choose or not choose, meaning we can pay for this action or not pay for that reality, which, let's say, our body and we as personality together with the body will acquire, together with our consciousnesses. That's the difference.
But at the initial stage of spiritual development, it is still recommended for some people to nurture and to invest attention so that
certainly, for sure,
a child, as you've said, would become
one should mature.
A CEO, right?
Yes.
So that this very primary consciousness...
Of course. When we train primary consciousness, That is, we are in the position of an observer from primary consciousness over all the actions of secondary consciousness. This is a very simple practice, friends. Well, many people, especially those who are not quite familiar with this terminology, will say, "What is that? How?" I'll just explain. You sit down, calm down, and observe your consciousness. You set some program to think about something, to discuss it in an internal dialogue, and at the same time, you observe this process. That point or that place from where you observe how consciousness works, how thoughts come to you, how these processes are solved, but you do not interfere, you observe. This is exactly the observer from primary consciousness. Everything is simple. However, when educating this child, and we know that primary consciousness stops its development approximately at the level of 6 years, 5 to 6 years old. It's like the age of a child. And that's where we actually appoint primary consciousness as the CEO of our entire life. It observes, it begins to manage. But we should remember, friends, that like any CEO, our primary consciousness is corrupt. It tends,
It's a traitor.
yes, to betray and to create corrupt schemes. That's natural. So as a start, it is good. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend you to be guided by primary consciousness, by this observer, in your life in general. Why? Because primary consciousness is very corrupt. It is where it is better fed. Therefore, and again, it is mortal. It cannot advocate your attainment of life. That's not its function. Therefore, you should become personality. You should liberate yourself from all the dictators in your head and really go to God. While you can come to God only through love, right?
Right.
While everything else that you've been told is secondary. Friends, those very practices are good. They are necessary. Just as you and I discussed, at least 5 times a day, for half an hour in order to attain peace. Yes, this is true, friends. That's for those who are just starting out. But when a person gains an initial experience, it is better not to stop this inner fire at all. Then practices serve for you to tune up. All of us actually get distracted. There is everyday life. There are problems, and people say, well, there are children, there is something else, there is work. That's clear, you get distracted somewhere.
Yes, you don't always manage to find the time.
Bustle, our life, and so on, to find the time. But if you do everything with the feeling of inner love, and do not lose this feeling, that's exactly practice. And when you lose it, that's where you should stop and perform a practice. Well, this is already like the second or the third stage, you know? But you should indeed begin with reminding yourself at least 5 times a day that you should actually learn to love. And once you learn that, it is necessary to support this love. There should be an incessant dialogue with the spiritual world. That's when it is right. And as soon as it weakens, even a little bit, you should give up everything and sit down and practice.
It is sort of a tuning fork to tune in.
Absolutely right, because this fire has to be maintained. It should grow and should not diminish, and it should be watched over like a hearth. You know, there is an expression, a keeper of the hearth. So all of us should be the keepers of our inner hearth in order to gain life.
You know, Igor Mikhailovich, thanks to what you've said, an understanding comes why some of the Holy Fathers mentioned that if a person, while being in prayer, suddenly finds himself in a position where grace comes to him, he should interrupt the prayer. It is this very point that indeed one realizes that prayer practices and meditative practices are merely a tool.
A tool for achieving spiritual practice.
Spiritual practice.
Whereas when grace comes to you, what begins? Spiritual practice.
Yes.
And the entire point of all those prayer practices, those mantras, meditations, and everything else is to achieve that state. As soon as you've reached it, stop and stay in that state. And afterwards, you should prolong it as long as possible. Why? Because this is spiritual practice. This is life. Even better is to preserve it forever. This doesn't mean that you have to stay in spiritual practice until infinity, although it is desirable. However, life won't allow that. Our body has plenty of needs, and we have to serve it like slaves. Yes, my friends, we as personalities have to serve our bodies and fulfill a lot of desires from our consciousness, such is the world. But these difficulties are necessary for us, as mature personalities, as equals, to enter the spiritual world and become equal among the equals and worthy among the worthy. And this is right.
Igor Mikhailovich, there are a lot of people around the world who actively work to spread the truth and to increase love throughout the world. And I notice how consciousness catches them at the following point. Precisely at the point when they are spreading the truth and multiplying this love by communicating with other people, consciousness tells them, you are now missing the time of group practice, let's say, when all people are immersing in practice together, when they are in sync and strengthening each other. And I very well remember you talking about every person's efficiency. That the most important thing is actually...
Well, if we look from this perspective, from the perspective of the spiritual world, then every person who is in this world must come to the eternal and infinite world. Why? Because the essence of a human being is precisely in gaining life. This is one criterion. There is also another one. It is the coefficient of usefulness for the spiritual world of a human staying here. Because sometimes it happens that a person has never performed any practices or prayers. He generally considered himself to be an atheist, but he did so much for the spiritual world that he gained life.
Oh, great.
Because he called it differently, From an atheistic standpoint, he was cultivating love for humanity and himself. He was conveying the essence and truth to people, defending the positions of truth and justice that were coming from his personality. And that's it. Such things also happened. Rarely, of course, very rarely, but they happened. This is also an example. And when a person performs, let's say, an action that is pleasing to the spiritual world, he defends its positions. It is, like there is total darkness, and people are walking around in this darkness, looking for something, and someone brings in light. And people start gathering towards this light. They see a road, and they come out of these swamps and marshes on a good, smooth, and firm road that leads them home. Tell me, this action of illuminating the way home for people from the swamps and darkness along a good road, is it comparable to a group practice in terms of the effectiveness of a particular individual?
No.
I also think it's not. It's much better and much more valuable, right? So it's true. And it's not them who worry. As personalities, they understand that this is right and continue to act. However, they still let consciousness manipulate them, but they don't give up.
Evaluate their spirituality.
But they don't
yes.
give up. They continue to act. That's already great. They are already one step away from victory.
Hearing consciousness, they load it even more.
They do the right thing.
And they understand perfectly well that if next time it sings its song again,
it means one should add a load to it.
Yes.
It means our consciousness has too much free time, and we give it too much energy. We give it too much of our own life for dominating us. Hence, it's not busy. Whereas when consciousness is 100% busy, it has no time for stupid things, right? While the best way to tame consciousness is to ensure starvation for it, for consciousness, not for a human. I emphasize, when you pay less attention and listen less to it, to its nonsense when you are busy with something. You just do that. Let's take that very prayer practice in any religion, a good prayer, only not those prayers where people ask for daily bread, health, benefits, positions, and everything else for themselves. Not sort of an Impexian prayer, but a normal one. where a person praises God, where he asks for God's love. Well, something good of that kind. And focusing on that, you should not let thoughts creep in. That's already a way to spiritual practice. Whereas attaining spiritual practice may already be considered a halfway to home, right? All that remains is to hold within oneself that love which emerges in spiritual practices. But in this case, it depends on each person. After all, we can carry a cup of coffee throughout the city without spilling it if we want to. So why can we not carry love that has ignited inside? Love for the spiritual world through just one day? We can, my friends. We can. Just like coffee, we can carry it through our day without spilling it on consciousness. We should just do our best.
Igor Mikhailovich, is it possible to attain peace or life just by staying in meditative practices or prayer practices?
Well, let me answer with a little association, friends, just to make it clear. What is a prayer practice? The chanting of some mantras, meaningful ones. I emphasize not just gibberish or meditative practices. It is learning to write. When you learn to write, so that later on, in spiritual practices, you would write the play of your own life. Is this clear? But the essence of everything, friends, is actually love. You should learn to love and fill this world with love. So, friends of mine, let's start with a simple thing, simply with loving each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, friends.